Thanks, Robert. I'm happy to be here today to share with you our findings accumulated over a period of 30 years, as Rob suggested. The topic of this talk deals with the potter John Poole Schermerhorn and Samuel Wilson. Much of this research was reported on in the 2005 issue of Ceramics in America, and since then we've learned a lot more, and as a result of that publication, many more pieces of stoneware have been forthcoming that have really added an important dimension to our understanding of the influence of Schermerhorn throughout this whole James River Valley region. He was closely associated with Samuel Wilson, and so I want to discuss Samuel in the context of Schermerhorn's work and show you some vessels that we think were created by Wilson, in some cases working in conjunction with Schermerhorn, and later we think he also worked in the 4-mile Bailey's Creek area, some 10 miles southeast of Richmond. So what I'd like to do is first introduce you to generally to how the research has evolved, to some background information on Schermerhorn, just in case you've not seen that 2005 article, but I would encourage you to go back to it if you want to learn more. As our collective efforts at demystification continue, I am pleased to have the opportunity to share highlights of some of my previous work, as well as detailed of more recent collaborative research regarding two significant potters from the region, John Poole Schermerhorn and Samuel Wilson. These two individuals not only shared a commonality of training as potters in the Troy-Albany region of New York's upper Hudson Valley prior to their arrival in eastern Virginia, but likely had met and developed an association that influenced their migration southward to embark on pottery manufacture. As a result, they were largely responsible for the successful transplantation to eastern Virginia of a New York, New Jersey stoneware tradition, which had evolved from the many immigrant craftsmen to that region trained in an earlier salt-glazed stoneware tradition originating in the Westerwald region of Germany. Armed with their specialized training, which for them defined the mental precepts and templates for both the proper structure of a successful pottery operation and the nature of styles, forms, and decorations appropriate to its products, together with a presumed friendship and previous knowledge of the area, their arrival at the end of the first decade of the 19th century set the stage for their subsequent profound and significant impact on not only the very nature and definition of the industry's manifestation in the James River Valley, but on its success across eastern Virginia throughout the century. The remarkable wares from their collective 4 decades of production in the James River Valley provides a glimpse into their New York state of mind, revealing a significant group of objects, illustrating their skill with a range of forms and decorative embellishments, rivaling other important and celebrated schools of production, both within and beyond the state. The influence of Schermerhorn and Wilson endures in the observed influences on wares produced subsequently in the James River region, and today, the remnants of their handicraft, both in the form of surviving extant wares and archaeological evidence, continue to offer insights in response to our insatiable queries and pursuit of greater understanding of the industry and its products. Beyond convincing you of the value of these objects for informing the present about the past, we trust that by the end of today's session, you will join us in appreciating and embracing the bold decorative aesthetic these simple utilitarian objects from the 19th century offer us in the 21st. First, let's explore the factors which may have influenced the decision these two potters made to come to Virginia. The availability of suitable and sufficiently sized clay deposits has been shown to be the most important factor in determining the distribution of potteries across the landscape. Also critical to the success of any endeavor was the existence of a ready market sufficient to support the potter through the purchase and use of the wares he produced, as well as access to a transportation system, as Rob suggested, for both import of raw material supplies and export of products beyond the local market. Existing employment opportunities in established or well-financed startup or expanding potteries provided an opportunity for a new enterprising potter to transition to a new region without disruption to income, while examining the area and market with an eye towards opportunities for independent business pursuits. Knowledge of the area, previous visits, or personal contacts would also have undoubtedly played an important role in facilitating one's decision to relocate. Interestingly, it appears to have been a fascinating interplay of these specific factors that brought Schermerhorn and Wilson to the James River Valley. Stoneware manufacture began in Richmond at the end of the first decade of the 19th century, having been preceded by a couple of short-lived earthenware endeavors, which have been documented beginning as early as 1791. The earliest evidence hinting at the area's valuable clay resources, however, is provided by an intriguing early reference to Richmond white clay in 1784, a handwritten letter by James Brindley. This letter was discovered by Rob, and he shared it with me. Brindley was an American canal builder who the same year had immigrated from England and settled in Wilmington, Delaware. He was involved in several canal projects, interestingly, including Virginia's James River project. Writing to his uncle in England, Mr. Brindley acknowledges the receipts of 12 crates of assorted wares that he has received from his uncle and promises to report back to the uncle regarding the most saleable sorts. He also goes on in the letter to promise his uncle that he will continue to seek the identification of staunch, able men that he can put the uncle in touch with. He goes on to say, and I quote, "As my time will be for the most part taken up in the canal business, and presume you wish to dispose of large quantities of your manufacture, of which I will inform you by first opportunity. You write me to send you some white clay that I mentioned in my last is at Richmond, 300 miles from here. I will endeavor to get you some." So this early reference to clay sort of is a prelude to what happened subsequently in the area, as well as the identification of many other deposits there that were important for the potters who were moving to the area. Just as English manufacturers were eager to market their wares to the region, so too were they, at least according to this letter, seeking out quality raw material resources for export to their existing outlets, or possibly in anticipation of establishing manufactories requiring an advanced scouting for both staunch, able men, as Mr. Brindley was looking for, as well as the most saleable sorts of wares. So he wanted to sort of get a feel for the market from his nephew, who was here working on the canals, both in terms of what did the consumer want in terms of ceramics in Richmond, and were there able bodies, staunch able men available who could assist him if he came here to establish a manufactory, and was the clay of sufficient quality to produce the kind of wares he wanted. Local production of wares, as they often put it in advertisements, equal or superior to those previously imported from England, Germany, or the New York, New Jersey area, allowed Virginia potters to successfully expand their enterprises by offering competitive pricing. This allowed them to eventually dominate the market, with Richmond becoming a hotbed of stoneware production during the second and third decades of the 19th century. The influx of potters was no doubt influenced by a variety of factors, including the War of 1812, concerns over the impressments of sailors, restrictions imposed by the Embargo Act of 1870, the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809, the repeal of which I assume no one has any argument with today, and additional factors, including the potters' desire to seek out new raw materials in growing population centers further south along navigable waterways, allowing for market expansion and greater distribution of their wares. To be sure, growing Virginia businesses, including pharmacies, distilleries, dairies, and mercantile operations, also created a demand that encouraged local pottery manufacture. Perhaps cognizant of the superiority of stoneware to meet both its pharmacy-related requirements as well as the growing utilitarian needs of local households, Duval's prescient decision to embark on the production of stoneware in Richmond set the stage for the subsequent development of rapidly expanding and diverse pottery manufacturing enterprises involving numerous individuals from different regions and with backgrounds in varying ceramic traditions. It was in February of 1791 that Benjamin Duval and Thomas Warren placed the first advertisement for a potter who, quote, understands working at the wheel. And this set the stage for an influx of New York-trained potters, among others, to Richmond. Benjamin Duval's involvement with Harwood in the Richmond tile manufactory, at B. Duval and Company from 1811 to 1815, and with Schermerhorn from 1811 to 1817, and with Wilson beginning in 1817 at his Richmond stoneware manufactory, illustrates his hiring workers largely trained in the New York, New Jersey stoneware tradition. Schermerhorn and Wilson arrived with a full repertoire of skills required during involvement with the industry in the upper Hudson Valley and along the Raritan Bay in Middlesex County, South Amboy, New Jersey, sufficient to ply their trade or craft. The identification of early stoneware forms with European antecedents and the recovery of incised shards with cobalt point to the handiwork of highly competent artisans trained in an early New York, New Jersey stoneware tradition originating in Germany. John Poole Schermerhorn was born on the 22nd of July, 1788 in Albany County, Shodak Township, New York, and is first identified as a potter in Benjamin Duval's 1814 advertisement offering stoneware for sale in Virginia. The documentation and evaluation of his production at Duval Stoneware Manufactory and in his own Richmond factory at Rockets reveals a fascinating assemblage of surviving wares illustrating a wide variety of forms and decorative techniques previously undocumented for Eastern Virginia. The wares also strongly reflect Schermerhorn's training in this transplanted stoneware tradition, which I mentioned previously. Despite his 40-year involvement in pottery manufacturing in Virginia, we are only now beginning to understand his production and appreciate the influence he had on the 19th century stoneware industry in Eastern Virginia. As I said, Schermerhorn began his pottery career in the same area he was born, the Albany-Troy area of the upper Hudson Valley. His initial contact with Potter Branch Green appears to have been between 1799 and 1802 in the southeast part of the village of Troy. The opportunity for this encounter was occasioned by Sir Schermerhorn's birth, circa 1788, in this same county, that of Rensselaer. It was here that Green operated and managed a rather poorly understood pottery. The Morgan, that's General James Morgan Jr., the son of Captain James Morgan Sr., and Smith Stoneware Factory. This factory also interestingly employed Roland Clark. You may be familiar with some of his wares. Advertisements during this period sought both journeyman potters from 1799 through 1802 and apprentices to the potter's trade in 1801. It appears that young Schermerhorn, who was 14 by 1802, responded to the advertisements of Green working in this partnership and began a working relationship with him that finally culminating between 1803 and 1805 by their arrival in South Amboy, New Jersey, where they became established with another pottery, the Morgan, Van Wickle, and Green concern of Middlesex County, New Jersey. And again, the place where Schermerhorn was trained and where he came from is, that's sort of the theme of my talk, is the transplantation of this New York tradition down to the Richmond, Southern Henrico area. So that's why I'm giving you this background, because when we engage in the Pot Fest, which is coming, and we look at all these pots that were manufactured in Richmond, I draw some comparisons with the potters that were working there. So I just want to give you a little context, so when you see the pots, you can understand where I'm coming from. Confirmation of Schermerhorn's association with the Morgan, Van Wickle, Green pottery of Old Bridge is provided by, this is just showing what the area there where he originated looked like. So, the confirmation of his association with the South Amboy pottery of Morgan, Van Wickle, and Green is provided by this mortgage. The mortgage was not, interestingly, to Green, but it was to General James Morgan Jr. For an interest in the land and the pottery. It is coincidental that the date of this mortgage with Mr. Morgan is in 1809, which was the same year that Branch Green left the concern to move to Philadelphia to begin manufacturing pottery. So it appears that Schermerhorn took over. He was almost at this point at the age of 21, so he was established in the trade, and he was taking over, assuming debt for Branch Green's previous interest in the pottery upon Branch leaving. However, despite the fact he did take over the mortgage, it's interesting that within less than a year, Schermerhorn left the Morgan Van Wickle Green pottery and moved to Virginia to ply his own trade, as we'll find out. John Schermerhorn's purchase of this 1/3 acre lot in the midsection of New Jersey in 1809 occurs in the hotbed of ceramics in America, South Amboy, Middlesex County, New Jersey. Situated opportunistically between New York City and Philadelphia and only 5 miles from the county seat at New Brunswick, and containing rich clay resources, including the Morgan clay banks and well-known Amboy and Woodbridge clays, and these clays were exported to other potteries, as Rob said, in Albany and Troy, both and used by many potters, a rich source of clays. This area was the, let's see, where was I? Containing rich clay deposits, including the Morgan clay banks, as I said, as well as the Amboy and Woodbridge stoneware clays. This area attracted many fine potters on a consistent and sometimes rotating basis. Even the great potters of the Remy, Crolius, and Comerall families are known to have spent some time and labors in this neighborhood. And let's see, this is South Amboy. Cheesequake is down here, and then Old Bridge is down here where the other pottery, where the pottery was, the Morgan Van Wickle. So this whole area, this is the clay banks were up here. So this is just a rich area of clay, and numerous potters were working here, and the clay was being exported, and you can see that the Raritan Bay provided access. So this is the area that where Schermerhorn was trained, and he brought that valuable knowledge and understanding of what a pottery should look like and what pots should look like with him as he came to Virginia. Despite the valuable pottery-related experience Schermerhorn had gained through his work here, he probably realized early on, as did Green, that the tight-knit Old Bridge families would limit his ability to establish, expand, or advance his own concern, or the likelihood that he would be the benefit or beneficiary of a pottery by succession. Given this and his strong family association with shipping and commerce, and that's something I didn't get into, was the Schermerhorn genealogy. When we did the original article on Schermerhorn, I had the pleasure of meeting one of Schermerhorn's great, I suppose, two or three great grandsons, Sterling Schermerhorn, and he cooperated with me in writing the article. And he provided lengthy genealogical information, and Schermerhorn's family was involved in shipping, and among other things, but that information is available in the article. Let's see. So given this, given Schermerhorn's strong family association with shipping and commerce and the tumultuous political climate with varying trade, manufacturing, and embargo restrictions, the stage was then set for Schermerhorn to explore new opportunities and horizons elsewhere. The pursuit of markets in southern coastal cities may not only have revealed sites for successful commerce, but pottery-related employment opportunities and potential locales for establishing stoneware manufacturing centers. Genealogical research, as I said, suggests Schermerhorn removed to Virginia by 1810, being located in Richmond by dated documentation in March of 1813. There is some speculation that Schermerhorn may have made his way to Charles City County initially as early as 1811, perhaps on an exploratory visit rather than as a full-time resident prior to him moving permanently to Richmond. Certainly by 1813, Schermerhorn, this just shows some information about the Morgan family and how the potteries evolved there with the Van Wickles and others marrying into the family. And this is what Schermerhorn faced in terms of trying to make his way in this environment, and clearly where he learned about the pottery tradition. Some of the Morgan pots that Rob told you are the types of pots that Schermerhorn was taught to make, and we see those influences on the wares that I'll have in the Pot Fest. Certainly by, let's see, where are we now? Certainly by 1813, Schermerhorn, as I said, was residing in Richmond and working at Port Mayo near Rockets. This is where Schermerhorn was working. This is the Duval site that's been talked about previously. You can see the James River and the access to the wharfs for shipping and receiving supplies. So it fits with Rob's discussion of the theme of the waterway providing ready access to markets and supplies and goods to receive and to ship the products of the potters. Duval's informative advertisement. Let's see. This is actually taken from Young's 1809 map of Richmond. Duval's informative 1814 advertisement is significant in that it identifies Schermerhorn as a potter. His ad in the Richmond compiler. Schermerhorn's response is also interesting, whereby he expresses his discontent with Duval's characterization of his limited involvement with his pottery operation. So clearly, Schermerhorn was the one that was leading the pottery efforts that were sponsored by Duval. And Duval not being a potter, but hiring the people from New York to engage in the manufacture of these items that were needed for the Richmond consumer as well as for his business pursuits. And Schermerhorn became frustrated and let Dr. Duval know this publicly in this advertisement appearing in the Daily compiler. This bold adversarial response is probably reflective of Schermerhorn's frustration with Duval's management, a growing confidence and self-assurance of his own skills and contribution to Duval's production, and a desire for independence, allowing proper recognition for his growing role in the early Richmond industry. So this is 1814. The year of 1817 was also a significant year for Schermerhorn in Richmond. He was married to Sarah Christian Wilson, and Sarah Christian was from Charles City County. So now we see a connection between Samuel Wilson, who I'll talk about in a minute, and Schermerhorn. Sarah Christian Wilson in Charles City County, the idea that Schermerhorn came here prior to coming to Richmond to live and work permanently. He journeyed perhaps with Samuel to see some of his kinfolks down in Charles City County. He met Sarah Christian Wilson, who he subsequently married, and the first son was William Francis, and Francis was Sarah Christian's father. And so there's all the Wilson families are very elusive, and understanding Samuel Wilson is difficult because there are so damn many Samuel Wilsons, both in Albany and in Virginia. And so it's a struggle, and that's why I call Samuel Schermerhorn's elusive associate. But anyway, the year 1817 is significant for Schermerhorn, not only because he married a local girl, Sarah Christian Wilson, but also because he began the establishment of his own pottery. He left the employ. You can see the frustration already by 1814. He left the employ of Duval and established his own pottery manufactory at Rockets that same year. And this shows again the location on a larger map. Let's see. Confirming Schermerhorn's continuing operation subsequent to 1817 is an 1820 advertisement. Let's see, I think I've got a slide of that. Well, this is just another indication of the location of the sites. Schermerhorn's up here. Here's Duval in relation to the James River. Let's see, where are we? Here is the ad that Schermerhorn published in 1820, talking about his operations that continue. And indeed, the census verifies his continuing operation that year, indicating he utilized 50 tons of clay, 80 cords of wood, 16 sacks of salt at a value of $350, employing 3 men, no boys, 1 kiln, and 3 wheels, with $300 in wages, $500 other expenses, to produce stoneware of all kinds. Transportation of wares, as you can see, were provided free to residents of the city to encourage them to purchase. Other forms of transportation of his goods, given the location along the James River, included bateau along the James River distribution points. This is a Civil War photograph that just gives you an idea of what obviously it's been subjected to the Civil War travesty, but it gives you an idea of what the area looked like with the watercraft and so forth that were coming and going, in the commerce that was occurring in the area of his pottery. Other obvious forms of transportation of finished products included bateau along the James River distribution points, and of course sloops, schooners, and other shipping able to navigate to Port Mayo, Richmond, below the falls of the James. During the first decade of the 19th century, the James was navigable as a result of the completion of 2 canals, rock clearing, and wing dams, which channeled the water in shallow stretches by bateau to the Lynchburg area, and by 1816, passage was possible through Balcony Falls to Buchanan, Virginia. By 1840, the James River and Kanawha Canal completed the canal at a safe remove from most of the river, and now accommodating the mule packet boat to Lynchburg. And by 1851, some 197 miles of canal were completed to Buchanan. Transportation shortly thereafter was possible to Lexington, Virginia. As westward expansion through the Cumberland Gap and wagon roads south accelerated, such an outlet became both crucial and expedient. And this is interesting for me, because so many of these pots that we now know were manufactured by Schermerhorn were turning up in the Virginia area where I live, in Rockbridge County, in Lexington, and Buchanan, down along the James towards Appomattox. Dealers and pickers were going to sales from early estates, and Bob Beard in particular, who had a shop down on the Roanoke Market, would come in, every other weekend with one of these great decorated Schermerhorn ovoids, and so many of them were turning up around Botetourt that collectors at one point said, "Have you seen any Botetourt ovoids lately?" Well, we now know they really didn't have much to do with Botetourt other than being consumed there. But so it's really fascinating how many of these were being shipped through the waterways into inland Virginia and intercoastally to North and South Carolina. And there's some documentation actually that was occurring, besides the presence of these crocks turning up at all these estates. Information regarding the marketing and shipping of wares from Richmond and the 4 Miles Bailey Creek area, which we'll discuss after lunch, is limited, but both interior, as I said, and to Virginia and the Carolinas, and intercoastal trade did occur. For example, we found an ad in the Lynchburg Virginian from the 4th of July, 1833, and it reads, "Stoneware, a few hogsheads of stoneware, well assorted, just received from the Richmond factory," at the mercantile of Joseph D. Evans. The ad was posted June the 17th, 1833. So here's confirmation that we have stoneware manufactured in Richmond from the Richmond factory coming there. So more than likely the Richmond factory, that's part of the stamp that Schermerhorn used on the signed wares that we'll see shortly. So that that here's evidence they were being shipped there. So it all makes sense. The frequency with which stoneware attributable to the James River Basin, including Schermerhorn wares like those references arriving in Lynchburg in 1833, is encountered from early estates and homestead in inland regions of Virginia following along the James River and Canal from Richmond to Lynchburg to Buchanan to Lexington confirms this movement of wares. Archaeological excavations and salvage operation conducted by the Virginia Canals and Navigation Society in Richmond Great Basin some years ago recovered, in addition to many fine examples of 19th century various watercraft that were used to navigate the rivers, they also found a large stoneware. Well, here's the river they were navigating. They also found this large stoneware storage jar, and clearly the form, the handle configuration suggests it's manufactured from our region. So we've got all the pots turning up at the early estates along the river. We've got we've got the ad in Lynchburg saying stoneware is coming from Richmond, and here we've got a pot. So everything came together nicely. This is a slide I love. Oliver and I were talking about how all these pots wind up in the interior areas, and he found a postcard of a canal boat that was being used to ship wares, I guess, up in Pennsylvania. And so you can see the pots are not Virginia pots, but I'm encouraging him to replace those with big Virginia ovoids. And he's able to do this. I don't have the skill to do it, but he placed the canal boat on 4 Mile Creek. So if we can just turn these Pennsylvania pots into Virginia ovoids, now we have an illustration to explain why they're all turning up in the area that I'm from. Okay, now it's time for our Pot Fest. I think that's enough of an introduction. So first, I would like to just focus on some of the new discoveries that have turned up since our article. This is an interesting form, and again, it's very New York. There are a lot of Albany coolers. Of course, there are coolers all over that look like this from that region. But this large cooler, is it 30-gallon, Marshall? Is that right? A 30-gallon cooler turned up from an estate down in eastern Virginia, and it's the first time that we've seen one. Schermerhorn has a stamp, which we'll see, but we've never seen one in size with script. John P. Schermerhorn, maker. And that's in 2 places on this, on the back and front, wasn't it? And it's just a wonderful, gigantic, obviously made for some sort of public tavern or hotel or something. And then another one showed up, I guess, just before this one, even though this one's not signed, but it's just profuse decoration. But you can see stylistically, it's very similar. This piece showed up at Jeff Evans' sale. And it is very similar to a lot of coolers that you see from the Albany region. This tall, cylindrical shape. I don't have one to show you as comparison, but I've seen many from that area. This one's had some repairs, but it's just it's a remarkable form, and it's just interesting that the cooler showed up. This is I think the largest extant stamped piece of Schermerhorn. It's stamped here, and this is one that showed up in Rockbridge County at an early estate that was first settled in 1786, and this had been in the house and handed down through the family, and it's still in Rockbridge County. But you can see Schermerhorn's characteristic marking there, the 5 under the handle, which is also very common. And Schermerhorn's earliest wares had these very large, sort of exaggerated handles that are often swiped with cobalt blue. Another signed piece, this is at, I believe, Colonial Williamsburg, and is in their collection. And did this one turn up in Richmond, Marshall? But it has more profuse decoration, but it has the identical maker stamp. And here's a close-up of that stamp. And the configuration of the stamp is interesting as you look at the exhibit and draw comparisons with some of the other stamps that were used. One of a recent discovery that we made that we'll talk about after lunch. But this is in MESDA's collection, and this is the Schermerhorn Crock that I think, Brad, didn't this show up about the same time as the Duval Crock, or slightly thereafter?
I think it was in the next journal.
Okay.
It came out after when we found the Duval piece. Great stamp.
Mm-hmm. Very few of these have survived, but you can see Schermerhorn's characteristic sort of undulating flowery vine with these opposing blossoms, peach or apple blossoms, people refer to them as. But what's interesting is this concave vase on this this flask, and I was looking at the treatment at the rim, and I went back to the Duval salvage article that Rob and Marshall did in Ceramics in America, and I've just popped this little slide in there just for comparison of those to this extant flask that showed up. But we did have this pictured in the article. It was such an unusual form, I just wanted to share it with you. You know, and originally we were finding all these ovoid vessels with this undulating vine and these opposing decorations, and we'd seen the stamped ones, so now, okay, we know they're Schermerhorn. But then there was a group of these with the numeric capacities in blue with this squiggle underneath. Some people suggest it was an S or a J, but we weren't able to relate the two confidently that they were the same school until we found these two vessels. This is the front, this is the back, front and back. Until then, we'd seen a bunch of these and a bunch of these, but none that combined this with that. So that sort of expanded our understanding of the Schermerhorn group to include those. And here's sort of a graduated set of those. These are a little more ovoid, a little more elongated, a little more finely turned. There's not as much clay in them. So, you know, whether there was a different hand or not, but they're still obviously from the Schermerhorn factory. And while there could be debate about whether this is a J or an S, there are a couple of examples where it clearly represents a letter. Here is another one that turned up afterwards. This is an incised, sort of a long-legged shorebird, but this motif is also interesting, as are several of the motifs, because we see the motifs between these potters being shared, being copied, and imitated, and it's just fascinating trying to distinguish the extant wares. And what it speaks to is, you know, fortunately we have waster shards, as Rob showed, from these sites, so we can make comparisons. But what it really requires us to have is archaeological investigations whereby we can look at artifacts retrieved from the ground in context and look at the stratigraphy to see which decorations are older and which are younger, to be able to confidently associate these various attributes from the site. But just two great bird crocks. You saw this one earlier. And in following Rob's lead, I tried to find characters illustrative of these characters. But this is a great jar that turned up. Did this turn up in Botetourt, Ralph, or was it down your way?
Floyd County.
In Floyd County.
Indian Valley.
I mean, it's just remarkable, no question, but that it's Schermerhorn. And then this one turned up right in the valley, and then sold in North Carolina, and now lives in Tennessee. But hopefully he can hop his way back to Virginia before too long. Another great piece, and this showed up after the article, and it showed up at Ken Farmer's auction, and you know, it sort of struck me as the decoration being a little odd. The shape seemed right for Schermerhorn. And then I looked down here, WF. Well, Schermerhorn's first son, again, was William Francis. Francis named after Sarah Wilson's father. So William Francis Schermerhorn, and he did pot at Schermerhorn's Pottery and dated 1833, which fits nicely with the age by when he would have been. And I don't know, where did this end up, Marshall? Is it in Richmond, or?
I think so.
Yeah. This is a great piece with the profile. We weren't sure, but then we looked carefully. It says John P. So we call it the self profile crock, and it's on exhibit here. But again, this is one of those more elongated rather than the more robust Schermerhorns with the numeric capacity. Another piece turned up then, inverted. This guy's upside down, and he looks very, very similar, but it's a very odd depiction of a human figure. Perhaps one of the most significant one, again, that shows this Germanic incised tradition. I mean, as far as incised eagles on Virginia stoneware, they're damn few. I mean, they're less than a half dozen pieces. There are the Morgans who trained with Comeron Crolius, who came to Rockbridge. There are a couple of great pictures that are from Rockbridge County from the 1820s. And then there's some up in the Timberville area. There was a potter who did some incising, and there's an eagle there, but very few, and none quite as elaborate as this one. And just for comparison, I'd seen this New Jersey one, and obviously this was by Nicholas, who was the son of the person that Schermerhorn was working with, and obviously the eagles are very different, but sort of the form, and you can see some resemblance between the pots. So I just stuck it in here for comparison. This is a clipper ship. This one again showed up in Virginia, probably shipped on the canal, and it's now, I think, in Colonial Williamsburg's collection. This piece showed up right after the article. We didn't picture it in there, but it's a fort with this huge flag, and again, it's one of these more elongated vessels, and there's a series of these vessels that resemble very much wares that Sweeney was making, and there are a lot of similarities between decorative motifs. So we think Schermerhorn had an influence on Sweeney's manufacture as well as did some other potters, but it's very difficult to sort out without further study of these sites. And here is the Jackson one, and I had a little blurb on this that I wanted to read. An interesting group of 3 attributed Schermerhorn vessels exhibit brushed blue cobalt decoration depicting or associated with Andrew Jackson. Jackson's boldness in wielding his executive powers, just as he's wielding his sword in this caricature, in the form of congressional vetoes, while drawing harsh charges of abuse of power brokering on dictatorship among his opponents, only further endeared him to his loyal supporters. While already well regarded because of his reputation for defeating the British at New Orleans during the War of 1812, his subsequent perceived opposition to elitism led the yeomen, farmers, and laborers, potters among them, to think of him, and I quote, as the greatest man of his age. These sentiments were memorialized by Schermerhorn not only on this vessel, but on several other surviving pieces, including this jug. You can see Jackson, and I apologize for inserting this little jar, but as I was putting this together, I started looking at these motifs, and then I started thinking back to that William W.F. 1833 jar with these similar motifs at the bottom where the initials and dates were in it, and I remembered this jar that I had in the living room with these. I've never been able to quite figure it out, and I'm thinking, is this some kind of a seed jar that maybe could have been made by Sherman? Anyway, so I stuck it in there. I forgot to take it out. And then finally, this may have related to, this was obviously Jackson's last year in office, 1837, but it also may relate to the closing of Schermerhorn's Pottery at Rockets, because he closed. We're not sure when he closed it. We think it was 1837 because he found some other clay deposits, and with the success of his business in the 1820 at Rockets, he purchased some land to the north of Richmond. And I want to tell you about that new discovery momentarily. But here's a crock that I think is very interesting. If you look at these handles, this is with the numeric capacity, obviously Schermerhorn, and you can see this with the S. And then you can compare those. I think this could have been made at the Duval factory with these handles, and then this maybe is a transitional piece, but these are very early. These handles are very different from what we see on later wares, and I was thinking, where do these tab handles come from? And again, as Rob suggested, the Cushman connection, I started looking at these Cushman pots, and they're sort of downturned, very tab handles, and of course, where's Cushman? Well, he's right in Albany. So, you just try to draw connections. The other thing is I was looking at the Cushman vessels and thinking about how they might be related based on where these guys were from. I noticed this handle with these sort of indentations at the margin, and then this jar turned up, which was manufactured right by the guys that Schermerhorn was working with, and you can see you've got this similar treatment, just looking for clues, that's all. And when I was over in Allegheny County photographing some Fulton crocks, a lady said, well, I've got some more crocks, and she pulled this out, and I said, wait a minute, I said, the handles are different. This is the standard sort of that early Schermerhorn robust handle, and then on the other side, it's like he's experimenting, how do they look and which one's going to work better. But again, you see this this treatment, compared to that. And I was just wondering if we can find clues to document the connections, then we can better understand how they took their mental templates and precepts of what the potteries and pots should look like, how they brought it here, and how it was adapted to the Virginia environment in combination with their interactions with other potters. How did the hybrid Virginia tradition evolve? What were the influences and how did it change? These are the questions that sort of intrigue us. But I talked about Schermerhorn's success at his own factory, and in the 1820s he was so successful that he bought some land up here at Montezuma. And as it turns out, and we didn't know this when we wrote the other article, we knew he lived at Montezuma, but we didn't know he had a pottery factory there. Well, Oliver Mueller-Hubach, who is a PhD student at William and Mary, became interested in pottery manufacturing, and we partnered with him in this project. And he started monitoring the site, drove by one day where Schermerhorn lived, and noticed that the house, which had been rebuilt from the original house, had been torn down. And he went walking around and he discovered some shards. And in doing research, this ad turns up, which talks about, well, lo and behold, Schermerhorn had another pottery. And this was the pottery he transitioned into. We think he operated both at the same time, located along Mechanicsville Turnpike, just 2 miles north of Richmond. And interestingly, this is a map of that area. This is the house down here, and this shows a close-up of the original house, which was rebuilt with a double portico porch, and that's the house that was raised. And what were they building there, Oliver? A church? Jehovah's Witness Hall. So fortunately, as a result of Oliver's work, and I think I have some slides of that. Here we are. Oliver and Marshall, we're not surprised Marshall's there, collected these shards. Essentially, a portion of the site had been bulldozed. They found, a couple of glazed bricks indicating there was a kiln there, and all these waster shards. And what this site discovery did for us, it expanded our understanding of the nature of Schermerhorn's operation in Richmond and of the types of wares he was making. Lo and behold, perhaps the fact that other group of vessels that were more elongated with the numeric capacities looked a little different is because maybe more of those were being made here. But here is some with the 2 and 4 capacity marks that hooked up nicely. But then we also see some of the opposing rounded blossoms, and then we see these tulips with these blossoms with these outer leaves or petals that are sort of disconnected, that are very characteristic of these jars. And if we go back, I want you to see the extant jars. And I said, wait a minute. When Oliver showed me the shards, I said, I've got a crock made at Montezuma. So I pulled this crock out, and there's no question. I mean, the motifs, this open blossom, this squiggle 2, and these frond-like motifs are identical to those on the shards. So this vessel is from his production at Montezuma. And then in viewing a friend's collection, also in Virginia, he said, well, I've got some crocks. And I said, wait a minute. This is another one. You can see the open blossoms. And this is one where there's clearly, that looks like an S. That's more than a squiggle. But these 2 pieces then have been definitely attributed to that production. But distinguishing more specifically what was made where is problematic. Just another look at the shards that they recovered there. And also, this is interesting, this is Oliver's drawing. They found these domed lid fragments. So he was obviously making some lidded jars. What precisely the form of the jar looked like that would have accommodated them, I don't know. But these are this is sort of an aerial view that lets you see the decoration on the top of some with this little finial knob at the top. So it's interesting to share with you. We've got another pottery site by Schermerhorn that no one knew about before Oliver's involvement with the project and his identification of this site. Then, this is an interesting ad that speaks to the valuable clay resources. When finally the property was passing out of the Schermerhorn family hands in 1871, this is an advertisement for the sale. And let me see if I can read the the good part to you. Special attention is invited to the fact that upon this land there are inexhaustible beds successfully worked for many years of the finest potter's clay known in Virginia. So from, from 1784 to this reference to clay, and we'll see other references to clay further south of Richmond, but you can see that the clay resources were rich there. And to speed through the elusive associate Samuel Wilson, and I've already hinted at his association with Schermerhorn and some information about his relation to the Wilsons in Charles City County. And it's interesting that Schermerhorn owned land, inherited land from the Wilsons, obviously because of the connection with his wife, in Charles City County. There's also a Wilson's Landing, and there are a couple of secondary sources that reference a pottery at Wilson's Landing. So we're thinking there might be even another pottery that we don't know about where Wilson may have worked some of the time. This just indicates what little we know about Wilson. Wilson was one of the guys that Brad identified in his article in a footnote, and we all carried copies of Brad's Duval article around with us because it had such a wealth of information beyond talking about Duval. The footnotes were something we referred to constantly, and that's what sort of motivated us. It took us some time, but motivated us to try to figure out who these other guys were and what they were doing and how it related to Duval and Schermerhorn. But Samuel was mentioned there as as being in the area in 1820, and we find out that he had a lot to do with the manufacture of wares, even though he remains very elusive. And one of the reasons is because he's from Albany, and there's so damn many Samuel Wilsons. This shows again the region where he was from, the Albany region. We believe he worked there. There are a number of potteries in that region that are concentrated along Washington Street. We have a Samuel Wilson that lived on Eagle Street from 1813 to 16, and then we had some evidence to suggest that's not the right Samuel Wilson. Then we had a Wilson who was a constable, and then we found some evidence to suggest it wasn't the same Samuel Wilson. Then we had one that was a meat cutter, and every time we think we got him, then we found something else to suggest it's not the right one. So we need to do more work, but clearly he was here and he was working probably with Schermerhorn at Duval's, with Schermerhorn at his Rockets location, and then at Montezuma as well. But what we've recently discovered is Wilson also makes his way down here to 4 Mile Bailey's Creek area and is working with the potters there. So it's amazing how the potters moved around. This is probably the most important Holy Grail, as Rob calls it, piece that is attributed to Wilson with Richmond inscribed on the bottom. You can see the distinctive curved tab handles, the forms, and the characteristic sort of tassel bellflower connected type decoration. And this stamp, this is one of the 2 capacity stamps that Wilson uses. Here's, as I showed in the introduction, here's a group of his wares, and these are just great. Rob was talking about the form of the Duval crock, and these crocks sort of speak to me like it speaks to you. I mean, they're just big, bold, ovoid. You just want to embrace them. They just have they have a primitive nature, but they have a very special aesthetic to someone who loves pots. But you can see the characteristic mark. This picture is just amazing. It's so ovoid and big. I mean, it's it almost seems like it's not functional. But just fantastic pots, and this one is on display in the exhibit. Also, you can see a jug that was made with the circular flower head with the upright leaves. You can see this tassel motif that becomes significant in a lot of the wares. And then Oliver had made a trip out to visit the sites at 4 Mile Creek, and he said, "Kurt, you want to see shots of some of the artifacts I found?" And he came up to visit me, and I said, "Wait a minute." And when I saw these, I said, "Oh my gosh, Wilson was working in 4 Mile Creek." And then as I looked at more of the shards and more return visits to survey the sites was made, more artifacts were forthcoming to indicate that Wilson was working down there too, probably at Richard Randolph's pottery and with Thomas Amos and Samuel Fraser, who we'll talk about after lunch. But it's so neat that we've got a Wilson crock signed Richmond, and Wilson and Schermerhorn were so close. You see Schermerhorn influences down at 4 Miles Bailey Creek. Well, lo and behold, we've got Wilson down there too. So this was a real exciting discovery for us. This is another vessel that's turned up recently. You can see the same motifs. Again, this swag and tassel, or I guess it's tassel and bellflower that it's copied after, motif is common. This is the one we talked about, Marshall, that was broken that turned up. You saw it in person, didn't you? And a picture, and then a friend of mine sent me seeing some of Rob's postings on Facebook. He said, "Hey, you're interested in Crocks? I've got a few," and he sent me this one. I said, "Oh my gosh, that matches the picture I've got in the dining." So I went out and compared them. But another group of these Wilson wares had this vertical neck with sort of a lipped flat rim. And, you know, whether it's another potter or another style pot he's making, but the handles are very similar. And then the decorations share elements as well. Another group by Wilson has this sort of winged tulip decoration that appears to mimic the Amos tulip, Amos having come from Baltimore down, and we'll talk about him later. But this is clearly a Wilson form. And then what we see is, as these potters work together and get to know each other's styles and decorative treatments, you see a borrowing and imitation, and it just sort of boggles your mind, some of the crocks that show up, trying to figure out who made it and who influenced who, and what journeyman went to what site. But it's a fascinating assemblage. These are what we call, I don't know if we call them the tall collar or vertical collar with the lipped ring, but many of them still have this swag and tassel or bellflower motif. And then there's some others, and this was another of the shards that Oliver recovered down from 4 Mile. And I said, wait a minute, is that somehow related to the Wilson production? And these jars rang a bell. This upright, you know, this might be a bit of a stretch, I don't know, but I wanted to put it in here just to show you there's more than just the tassel. And then in terms of understanding Wilson's production, we began to see another group of pots come out with a very similar too, even though they didn't have the teeth around it, with these rolled handles, but you can see the same tassel design. Then, as we began to look, we looked at the capacity marks, and we saw that the rolled handle was related to a group of wares with a similar capacity mark, but with this sort of bent tulip design. And I said, gosh, all these jars, even though they have different decorations, they're all related. You know, the rims are related here, the handles are related. And so was this another potter working? Was it another variation in his repertoire of what crocks and what decorations to use? But we call this the lollipop, the bent tulip group. But these are wonderful broad handles with these great ovoid forms. And this piece, you know, talk about, Brad was telling me the story last evening about being on the front porch. The lady was wondering why he was lingering there with the Duval crock, and just where you find these pieces. This piece was found inverted and half buried in a garden in Botetourt County, and they used it in the garden obviously to protect the plants against frost. And a dealer picker saw it, and it had a crack down it, and it came to an antique dealer in Lexington, and I walked in, he said, hey, I got a crock to show you, and I went, wow. And so you can see the same vertical neck, the swags, but what this crock does that none of the others did, other than the handle connection, it gives me this, you know, the swags with the bent tulip. You know, so again, we're expanding our understanding of what the range of variation in Wilson attributed wares are. Whether they were all by his hand or by someone working with him, I don't know. So then we said, well, how about all these decorations? What are the origins of them? Where do we see similar decorations? And let's look at where he came from and how that informs us about his Virginia wares. So as I said, the Comerall, Crolius, Remy people were up in South Amboy. Obviously, that's where Schermerhorn was trained. And if you look at these decorations, you see some similarities, although adapted to Virginia, with the swag and tassel motif. Another crock appears to relate to this shard. Well, this shard's from 4 Mile Creek too. Again, looking at the Morgans, I talked about how the Morgan, I showed you the genealogy of the Morgan family. This David Morgan is related, but not directly connected with the with the Morgans we were talking about. This Morgan actually apprenticed to Crolius and Comerall, and his son, John Morgan, moved to Rockbridge County and made some of those incised eagle pictures that I was telling you about, one of the small number that are known in Virginia. But again, it shows the transplantation of this, of this tradition to, in one case, rural Rockbridge, and in our case, to the James River Valley. Some more pieces made by him. Again, relating back to the Morgan connection. The South Amboy, you can see this same clamshell or with tassel motif on these crocks from that region. And in terms of the bent tulip jar, we look to Albany, and here is Boynton. Now, I have no idea, no connection that I have been able to establish, but I haven't tried hard, but about Wilson being associated with him. But Wilson's from Albany. But look at that. I mean, look at the form of the tulip. And look at this one. And look at the shard from 4 Mile Creek. So there's more than one connection telling us that Wilson was there. And there's several connections that shows Wilson's influence to the potters working in the region from whence he came. Another tulip here on a crock from that region. This connects to another group. You can see the rolled handles. Then we have this finer stamp with the cross hatching in the interior. This is another group of crocks made by Wilson. And one of these just turned up at auction recently. But it's related to this jar that was sold by Crocker Farm that's stamped Kelso. It's got the same capacity mark. Well, we find a John Kelso in Richmond records. He operated, apparently he owned a boarding house. He was involved in, his name is signed as a witness on many land deeds. And there's some suggestion that this John Kelso may have been involved as an owner of the pottery, perhaps financing Wilson, and perhaps accounting for one of the reasons that documentary evidence about Wilson is so elusive. Okay, a close-up of that, and then there's one other group, and I wanted to show this because, here's that clamshell decoration again. Some more of that same group. And I wanted to, let's see. Another Boynton. This is a inverted tassel group. It connects to the Boyntons too. Let's go right through this. This shows, anyway, here, this is all the evidence we got Wilson at 4 Mile Creek. This is the New York connection. And let me read my summary. The success of Schermerhorn and Wilson's endeavors can in no small way be measured by the remarkable assemblage of surviving signed and attributed wares and their archaeological counterparts produced in the Richmond area, either at Duval's Stoneware Manufactory, Schermerhorn's Richmond Manufactory at Rockets, his Montezuma factory along Mechanicsville Turnpike, or during Wilson's involvement with the potteries of 4 Mile Creek in southeastern Henrico, or at as a yet unidentified kiln site, perhaps in Charles City County. The documentation of these wares allows recognition that Eastern Virginia stoneware embellishes a full range of artistically produced forms with varying decorative treatments, including incising, cobalt brushed, and slip loop cobalt floral, animal figural motifs rivaling those from other areas. Schermerhorn's sturdy, robust ovoid jars with flowing cobalt decoration exhibits a level of artistic talent seemingly in contrast with the robust, thick-walled crock forms and primitively executed incised decorations involving ships, human profiles, eagles, hearts, and fish, all of which are reflective of his life experiences. One more paragraph. The unique stoneware manufactured by Schermerhorn directly reflects his training and work with the Morgan Van Wickle Green Pottery in Old Bridge, as well as his earlier experiences in the Troy, New York area, indicating the influence of this New York, New Jersey stoneware tradition, while Wilson's production similarly shows his strong Upper Hudson Valley influence. By adapting their New York state of mind to the Eastern Virginia environs, markets, consumers, natural raw materials, and through successful interactions, exchanges, and negotiations with fellow potters trained in differing traditions and areas, they had a profound and enduring impact on the development of a distinctive hybrid Virginia stoneware tradition, which holds significant potential for more fully informing our understanding of the history of ceramics in Virginia. From Troy to Albany on the Hudson, Schermerhorn and Wilson's New York state of mind subsequently impacted stoneware production from Richmond to Newmarket on the James in ways that we're only now beginning to understand. Thank you.